Female kayaker swallowed by gigantic saltwater crocodile. How will this story turn out? To find out, watch the video to the end. But first, please subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications to get more stories like this. The sun glared off the surface of the river, turning the water into a shimmering path that wound its way through dense mangrove forests. The air was thick with humidity, carrying the scent of brine, rotting vegetation, and the distant chirping of unseen birds. Every ripple in the water seemed alive, shifting unpredictably in the slow-moving current. The jungle pressed in from all sides, its darkened corridors hiding countless creatures, watching, waiting. Emma Foster adjusted the straps of her life vest, her paddle dipping into the water with smooth practice strokes. She was alone, just as she had planned. This trip was supposed to be a personal challenge, an escape from the noise of the city, and a chance to reconnect with nature. The river was both beautiful and intimidating, its depths unknown, its currents whispering secrets in the language of the wild. The kayak glided silently through the water, passing between twisted mangrove roots that curled like grasping fingers. Emma had been paddling for nearly an hour, her arms steady, her breaths even. The journey had been peaceful until now. A strange shift in the air sent a shiver down her spine. It was something instinctive, primal, a feeling that told her she was not alone. The jungle was filled with life, but this was different. This was focused, predatory. She paused mid-stroke, allowing her kayak to drift. The silence became overwhelming. No birds, no insects, nothing but the gentle lap of water against the hull of her vessel. Then a sound, a deep, resonant splash somewhere behind her. Emma twisted her body slightly, her eyes scanning the water. She saw nothing, just the dark, slow-moving current, the tangled vegetation, the endless green stretching into the distance. But she knew something was there. Her grip on the paddle tightened as she resumed her strokes, this time quicker, more urgent. The kayak responded instantly, slicing through the water. She told herself it was paranoia, just the tricks of an overactive imagination. But her body refused to listen. Then another sound, this time closer. A low, guttural rumble vibrated through the air, so deep it was felt more than heard. It was unmistakable, the sound of something immense, something ancient. Emma's breath hitched. Her mind screamed one word, crocodile. Her heart pounded against her ribs, her muscles burning as she forced herself to paddle faster. She knew about saltwater crocodiles. She had read about them, watched documentaries, seen their immense power. Apex predators, silent killers. They could hold still for hours, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And now one was watching her. Another splash, this time directly behind her. Emma chanced to glance over her shoulder, and her blood ran cold. A massive scaled head was breaking the surface of the water. Its eyes, dark and unblinking, locked onto her with terrifying precision. The crocodile's ridged snout dripped with river water, its nostrils flaring as it took in her scent. It was close. Too close. Emma paddled harder, her lungs burning, her arms screaming in protest. But the crocodile was faster. A powerful tail propelled the beast forward with terrifying ease, its movement nearly soundless except for the rhythmic displacement of water. She wasn't going to make it. The realization hit her like a thunderclap. No matter how fast she paddled, no matter how desperately she tried to flee, she was in the crocodile's territory now. This wasn't her world. It was his, and he had already decided she was prey. Then the water exploded. Emma barely had time to register what was happening before she was airborne, the force of the crocodile's strike launching her from the kayak. The world spun violently. Sky, water, sky again, then impact. She hit the river hard, the current swallowing her instantly. The cold shock of it stole the air from her lungs, dragging her under before she could even gasp. Darkness surrounded her, bubbles erupting from her mouth as she kicked frantically, fighting against the pull of the water. And then she felt it. A vice-like pressure clamped down on her leg, white-hot pain lancing through her entire body. The crocodile had her. Emma's scream was lost to the water as she was yanked downward. The force was unimaginable. It wasn't just pulling her, it was dragging her deeper, deeper into the murky abyss. The infamous death roll had begun. Her world became a blur of movement. The crocodile spun violently, its immense body twisting and thrashing, trying to tear her limb from limb. The force was indescribable. Her vision blackened at the edges, her body a ragdoll in the predator's grip. She couldn't breathe. Her lungs screamed for air, her instincts begging her to fight. But she was drowning, and the crocodile was winning. Darkness pressed in around Emma as the water churned violently. The pressure on her leg was unbearable, the crocodile's jaws an unbreakable trap. Her world spun as she was tossed and turned in the vicious death roll. The force wrenched her body, twisting her joints, her muscles straining to stay intact. Her lungs burned, every cell in her body screaming for oxygen, but the river showed no mercy. Somewhere in the depths of her mind, a singular thought broke through the chaos. She couldn't die here. Summoning every ounce of strength she had left, Emma fought back. Her instincts took over, her hands clawing desperately at the crocodile's rough, scaled skin. It felt like stone, impenetrable and ancient. Her fingers found its eye, and without hesitation, she pressed her thumb into the soft tissue. The crocodile reacted instantly. The beast thrashed, releasing a guttural growl that vibrated through the water. Its jaws loosened for the briefest moment, just enough for Emma to wrench her leg free. Pain exploded through her body, but she didn't stop to think. She kicked upward, ignoring the searing agony, fighting her way toward the shimmering light above. Her chest was seconds away from collapsing. The pressure, the lack of oxygen, the overwhelming pain, it was all too much. Then her head broke the surface. Emma gasped, her lungs flooding with air. The sound of the jungle crashed into her ears. The cries of birds, the rustling of leaves, the distant roar of a waterfall. But beneath it all, there was something else. A deep, menacing rumble. The crocodile was not finished. She turned, her eyes wild with fear. The massive beast was only feet away, its ridged snout barely above the waterline, its yellow eyes locked onto her. It wasn't just hunting. It was angry. Emma forced her body to move, her arms flailing as she swam toward the kayak, which had miraculously remained afloat a few yards away. Every stroke was agony, her wounded leg barely functioning, the water feeling thicker, heavier, like it was trying to pull her back under. The crocodile surged forward. A single, powerful thrust of its tail sent it rocketing toward her, its massive body cutting through the water with terrifying ease. Emma pushed harder, her fingers stretching toward the kayak. Just a little more. The crocodile's jaws opened wide, then impact. Emma slammed into the kayak, her hands gripping the edges with all her might. With a guttural scream, she used the last of her strength to haul herself onto the unstable surface. The kayak tipped dangerously, nearly sending her back into the water, but she held on. A deafening splash erupted behind her. The crocodile had lunged. Emma barely had time to react before the beast's enormous jaws clamped down on the side of the kayak. The force sent shockwaves through her body, the kayak jerking violently as the predator attempted to pull it under. She grabbed her paddle. Without thinking, she turned and slammed the blade of the paddle against the crocodile's snout. Once, twice, a third time, it roared. For the first time, the crocodile hesitated. Emma didn't waste the opportunity. She flipped onto her stomach, gripping the paddle like a lifeline, and started paddling with every ounce of strength left in her broken body. The crocodile watched. For a moment, it seemed to consider continuing the chase. But something in Emma's wild, desperate movements made it pause. It wasn't fear in her eyes. It was survival. And finally, the river reclaimed its king. The beast sank beneath the surface, disappearing into the depths as if it had never been there at all. Emma paddled until her arms gave out, until the mangroves began to blur, until the sound of rushing water filled her ears and she realized she had made it. She had survived. The crocodile had let her go. Or perhaps she had fought just hard enough to make it reconsider. Either way, she would never forget the feeling of those eyes watching her, even as she drifted towards safety. The jungle never truly let you go. Emma's breath came in ragged gasps as she clung to the kayak, her fingers trembling from exhaustion. The pain in her leg was excruciating, a deep, pulsing wound that sent sharp stabs up her thigh with every slight movement. Blood swirled in the water beneath her, a stark reminder of just how close she had come to being dragged into the abyss forever. But the crocodile was gone, or at least she hoped it was. The river was eerily calm now, as if the violent struggle had never happened. The sun hung low on the horizon, casting a golden hue over the water, but Emma barely noticed. Her mind was racing, adrenaline still coursing through her veins. She needed to get out of here fast. With trembling arms, she adjusted her position, gripping the paddle with renewed determination. Every muscle screamed in protest, but she forced herself to move, pushing through the pain. She had no idea how far she had drifted, but she couldn't risk staying in the open water any longer. The jungle was still watching. A rustling sound in the mangroves made her heart skip a beat. She froze, listening. Then movement. Something large. Panic surged through her once more. Was it the crocodile? Had it followed her? Was it just waiting for her to drop her guard before striking again? She tightened her grip on the paddle, her eyes darting to the shoreline. Dense vegetation lined the riverbanks, shadows shifting in the dimming light. The sound came again, closer this time. A heavy, deliberate step. Emma's pulse pounded in her ears. She had escaped the jaws of a prehistoric predator. She wasn't about to fall victim to something else lurking in the jungle. Then a voice. Hello? Is someone there? Relief crashed over her like a wave. A human voice. She turned sharply toward the sound, barely able to believe what she was hearing. Through the thick foliage, a figure emerged, an older man dressed in rugged outdoor gear, holding a machete in one hand and a radio in the other. He looked just as shocked to see her as she was to see him. Oh my God, she gasped. Help me. The man didn't hesitate. He rushed into the shallow water, reaching out to steady her as she half collapsed into his arms. You're hurt, he said, his voice laced with concern. What happened? Emma couldn't find the words. How could she even begin to explain what she had just endured? Instead, she simply whispered, Crocodile. The man's expression darkened. He glanced toward the water, scanning for any sign of the beast. You're lucky to be alive, he muttered. Come on, we need to get you patched up before that thing decides to come back. Emma didn't argue. She let him help her onto the shore, her body too weak to protest. The ground felt strange beneath her feet, solid, unmoving. She had spent what felt like an eternity battling against the river, and now standing on dry land felt almost foreign. But she was safe. For now. The man led her to a small, makeshift campsite nestled within the trees. A fire crackled in the center, casting flickering shadows against a tarp strung between two trees. He guided her to a log and handed her a bottle of water. Drink, he instructed. Emma did as she was told, the cool liquid soothing her parched throat. She hadn't even realized how thirsty she was. The man knelt beside her, examining her injured leg. This is bad, he said grimly, but not as bad as it could have been. You need stitches, though. We need to get you to a hospital. Emma nodded weakly. How far? There's a ranger station about 5 miles upstream. I have a bow. 5 miles. It sounded like an impossible distance, but she had no choice. She wasn't staying here, not with that thing still lurking beneath the surface. As the man worked quickly to bandage her wound, Emma let her eyes drift back to the water. She could still see it in her mind, the crocodile's unblinking eyes, its monstrous jaws. It had come for her. It had nearly won, and yet she was still here. As the boat engine rumbled to life a few minutes later, she allowed herself to close her eyes for the first time since the attack. She had survived, but she would never, ever forget. The boat rocked gently as it moved through the winding river, the hum of the small engine, the only sound breaking the jungle's eerie silence. Emma sat in the back, her leg hastily bandaged, her body wrapped in exhaustion. Every movement sent fresh jolts of pain through her, but she refused to let herself drift into unconsciousness. She needed to stay awake. Needed to stay alert. The crocodile was still out there. The man, who had introduced himself as Daniel, kept his eyes on the river ahead. He navigated the boat with practiced ease, his hands steady on the wheel. I've been out here for years, he said after a long silence. Never seen anyone survive a croc attack like that. Emma forced a weak smile. Guess I got lucky. Daniel shook his head. That wasn't luck. That was a fight. He glanced at her, his eyes filled with something between admiration and concern. Not many people make it out of a death roll. Emma shuddered at the memory. The sensation of being pulled under spun in a violent, disorienting spiral. It was something she would never forget. She still felt like she was drowning, even now. How did you end up out here alone? Daniel asked. She hesitated before answering. I'm a wildlife photographer. I was tracking a family of river otters. Thought I could get a better angle from the water. She let out a breathless laugh, shaking her head. Clearly, I was wrong. Daniel gave a knowing nod. People think they understand the jungle. But out here, you're not the top of the food chain. Emma didn't need to be told twice. She had learned that lesson firsthand. The river narrowed, the dense foliage pressing in from both sides. The trees were thick, their tangled roots dipping into the water, creating endless shadows and hiding places. Emma tried not to think about what might be lurking beneath the surface. Then, Daniel suddenly cut the engine. The abrupt silence sent a chill down her spine. "What? Why did you stop?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel held up a hand, signaling her to stay quiet. His eyes scanned water, his entire body tense. "Something's wrong," he muttered. Emma's pulse quickened. She followed his gaze, her breath catching in her throat. The water ahead was rippling, not from the wind, not from the current. Something was moving beneath the surface. The boat drifted slightly, carried by the slow-moving river. Daniel reached for a machete strapped to his side. "Stay still," he whispered. Emma didn't need to be told twice. The ripples grew closer. Then, without warning, the water exploded. A massive shape surged upward, jaws wide, eyes locked onto them. The crocodile. Emma barely had time to scream before Daniel swung the machete, striking the beast across its snout. The impact sent it reeling, but it didn't retreat. It thrashed wildly, the boat rocking violently beneath them. "Move!" Daniel shouted. Emma scrambled to grab onto something as the boat tipped dangerously. Daniel yanked the engine cord, the motor sputtering to life just as the crocodile lunged again. The boat lurched forward, narrowly escaping the beast's snapping jaws. Emma turned just in time to see it disappear beneath the surface once more. But she knew it wasn't gone. It was hunting them. Daniel pushed the boat as fast as it could go, his knuckles white against the wheel. "It's following us," he said through gritted teeth. Emma's heart pounded. "Why? I thought it would have given up by now." Daniel's expression was grim. "This isn't just any croc. This is a territorial predator. And we're in its territory." The river twisted ahead, the ranger station still miles away. They weren't out of danger yet, and Emma had the sinking feeling that the crocodile wasn't done with her. The boat cut through the river, the engine's low rumble, the only sound breaking the thick tension between them. Emma gripped the sides, her breath shallow, every muscle in her body tense as she glanced behind them. The water was deceptively calm now, a glassy reflection of the looming jungle, but she knew better than to trust it. That crocodile was still out there. Daniel's hands were tight on the throttle, his jaw clenched as he navigated the narrow bend of the river. "It's not just hunting," he muttered, mostly to himself. "It's stalking." Emma swallowed hard. "How do you know?" Daniel gave her a quick glance. Crocodiles don't waste energy. If they miss a strike, they move on. But this one... He exhaled sharply. "It's got a grudge." Emma shuddered. The idea of a crocodile holding a personal vendetta against her was beyond terrifying. It had already tried to take her once, and now, even after she had escaped its grasp, it wasn't letting go. A splash sounded from the right. Emma's heart leaped into her throat. She whipped her head around, scanning the river. The water had barely been disturbed, but she saw something, a shadow slipping just beneath the surface. "It's coming," she whispered. Daniel cursed under his breath. He yanked the throttle, pushing the boat harder. "Hold on." The boat jolted forward, the speed causing the water to ripple violently around them. The jungle became a blur of green, but Emma's eyes remained locked on the water. She wasn't going to be caught off guard again. Then another ripple. Larger, closer. She barely had time to react before the crocodile struck. The impact sent the boat lurching sideways, nearly throwing her overboard. Emma shrieked, gripping the edge with all her strength as water splashed over the sides. Daniel fought to regain control, his muscles straining as he wrestled with the wheel. The crocodile rammed them again. This time, Emma's fingers slipped. Her body pitched forward, her legs sliding out from under her. The world spun. For one terrifying second, she was airborne, then cold. Icy water closed around her like a vice, stealing her breath, pulling her under. The river swallowed her whole, its murky depths wrapping around her like a living thing. She thrashed, kicking wildly, her lungs screaming for air. Then she saw it. The crocodile. It was right there. A monstrous, ancient predator, its eyes locked onto her with chilling precision. Its powerful tail sent a cloud of silt swirling in the water as it moved, gliding toward her with terrifying ease. Emma's scream was lost in the river. She twisted, her arms flailing as she struggled to swim, but the current dragged at her, slowing her down. The crocodile was faster, stronger. It was only a matter of seconds before it closed the distance. A hand grabbed her wrist. She barely registered what was happening before she was being yanked upward. Her head broke the surface and she gasped, her lungs burning as she gulped down precious air. Daniel. He had dived in after her. Climb, he shouted, pushing her toward the boat. Emma didn't think, she reacted. She grasped the edge, using what little strength she had left to haul herself up. Daniel was right behind her, throwing himself onto the deck just as the crocodile surged up from beneath him, its jaws snapping shut just inches from his leg. Emma scrambled backward, her heart pounding. The crocodile's head hovered just above the water, its powerful jaws dripping, its yellow eyes furious. Daniel grabbed the shotgun from the boat's supply box. Before Emma could say anything, he fired. The shot rang out across the river, deafening. The crocodile recoiled, its massive body twisting in the water before it disappeared beneath the surface once more. Silence. The jungle seemed to hold its breath. Emma panted, her entire body shaking. Did you get it? Daniel exhaled slowly. But I bought us time. Emma wasn't sure if that was a relief or not. Daniel tossed the shotgun aside and grabbed the throttle again. We need to move. No. The boat roared forward, the river rushing past them as they sped toward the ranger station. Emma didn't dare look back. She had no idea if the crocodile was still following. And she wasn't sure she wanted to know. The boat tore through the river, kicking up a foamy wake as Daniel pushed the engine to its limits. Emma sat slumped against the side, her breath ragged, her body trembling with exhaustion and adrenaline. The sting of her wounds barely registered anymore. Her mind was still caught in the terror of what had just happened. She had been in the crocodile's grasp. She had looked into its eyes. And yet, she was still here. Daniel kept glancing over his shoulder, his grip tight on the wheel. We're close, he muttered, almost to himself. 10 more minutes. Emma nodded weakly. She wanted to believe him, but every second felt like an eternity. The river stretched endlessly ahead, its murky surface concealing whatever dangers lurked below. Even though the crocodile had disappeared after the gunshot, she knew it wasn't gone. It was waiting. The jungle around them felt too quiet. The usual chorus of insects, birds, and distant howls had fallen into an eerie stillness. It was as if the entire world had paused, holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable. Emma's hands clenched into fists. What if it comes back? Daniel didn't answer right away. He kept his eyes on the water, his jaw set. It will, he finally said. But we'll be ready. Emma exhaled sharply. She wasn't sure if she believed that. Then, another ripple. Emma's stomach dropped. Not again. The water broke apart just behind them, the unmistakable shape of the crocodile emerging from the depths. This time, it wasn't striking blindly. It was chasing them. Daniel saw it too. Hold on. The boat surged forward, but the crocodile was relentless. It cut through the water with terrifying speed, its powerful tail propelling it closer and closer. Emma's pulse thundered in her ears. It's gaining on us. Daniel gritted his teeth. Come on, come on. The crocodile lunged. Its massive jaws snapped shut just inches from the boat's motor, its entire body launching out of the water in a terrifying display of raw power. Emma screamed as the boat rocked violently, water splashing over the sides. Daniel swerved sharply, narrowly avoiding a second strike. But the crocodile wasn't giving up. It struck again, this time slamming its massive body into the side of the boat. The impact sent Emma sprawling, her hands desperately clawing for something to hold on to. The boat tipped dangerously, nearly capsizing. Daniel fought for control. We're not going to make it at this speed. Emma's mind raced. There had to be something they could do. Then she saw it. Up ahead, the river split into two paths. One was wide and open, the other narrower, with fallen trees and tangled roots jutting out from the water. Trap? Emma grabbed Daniel's arm. Go left. Into the trees. Daniel's eyes widened. Are you crazy? We'll get stuck. It's too big to follow us through, she argued. It's our only chance. Daniel hesitated for only a second before jerking the wheel left. The boat veered sharply, cutting through the narrow passage. Branches scraped against the sides, the hull groaning in protest. The overhanging trees closed in around them, blocking out the sky. Emma turned, her heart hammering. The crocodile reached the fork. It hesitated. Then, with a furious hiss, tried to follow. Emma held her breath. The beast surged forward, but the passage was too tight. Its massive body slammed into the tangled roots, halting its momentum. It thrashed and raged, snapping its jaws, but it was trapped. Emma let out a shaky laugh, barely believing it. They had done it. Daniel didn't slow down. He pushed the boat forward, weaving through the twisted trees until, at last, the river opened up again. Emma sagged in relief. The ranger station was visible in the distance. They had made it. For the first time since the attack, she felt like she could finally breathe. But deep down, she knew this wasn't over. That crocodile would remember her, and she would never forget it. The ranger station loomed ahead, a sturdy wooden structure nestled against the dense jungle. Emma could see figures moving along the dock, rangers in khaki uniforms, some armed, others barking orders into radios. The sight should have reassured her, but she couldn't shake the feeling of unease still clinging to her. Daniel cut the engine as they approached, letting the boat drift the last few feet. The moment they were close enough, two rangers grabbed the sides and pulled him in. One of them, a grizzled man with a deep tan and tired eyes, leaned in. What the hell happened? He asked, scanning the boat, then Emma. His eyes widened when he saw her ripped life vest and the claw marks raking down her arms. Crocodile, Daniel said bluntly, jumping onto the dock before turning back to help Emma. Jesus, the ranger muttered, waving to his team. Get the medic over here. Emma tried to steady herself as she climbed onto the dock, her legs weak and trembling. The instant her feet touched solid ground, the reality of what she'd been through came crashing down on her. She felt lightheaded, her breath shallow. Daniel caught her before she could fall. You're okay, he assured her, his grip firm. You're safe. Emma nodded weakly. Safe. The word felt foreign. After everything she had just endured, she wasn't sure she'd ever feel truly safe again. The medic arrived, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a calm demeanor. She gently guided Emma onto a bench near the station's entrance and began assessing her injuries. You're lucky, she said as she cleaned the wounds. These aren't deep. You'll have some bruising, maybe some scars, but you'll heal. Emma barely heard her. Her mind kept replaying the moment she'd gone under, the moment she had locked eyes with a crocodile. It wasn't just an animal. It was something else. A predator with purpose. Nearby, Daniel was talking to the lead ranger, filling him in on what had happened. It didn't behave like a normal croc, he said. It was calculated. It kept coming, even when we should have been out of its territory. The ranger frowned. That's not normal behavior. Not unless... He trailed off, rubbing his jaw. Daniel narrowed his eyes. Unless what? The ranger hesitated, then gestured for them to follow him inside. Emma barely had the strength to stand, but the weight in his voice sent a shiver down her spine. She forced herself to move. Inside the station, the walls were lined with maps and wildlife reports. The air smelled of coffee and damp wood. The ranger pulled out a large, faded folder from a filing cabinet and spread its contents on a table. This isn't the first time, he said. Emma's breath caught. What do you mean? The ranger tapped a photograph. It was old, black and white, showing a group of hunters posing beside a massive crocodile. But this wasn't an ordinary kill shot. The hunters weren't smiling. They looked shaken. The crocodile was nearly 20 feet long, its scales riddled with scars, its eyes oddly human. That was taken over 40 years ago, the ranger continued. Locals claimed that Croc was responsible for over a dozen deaths. They called it the River Demon. It was finally put down, but he flipped to another page. A more recent photo. Different crocodile, but the same scars. Emma felt her stomach twist. Are you saying it's the same one? The ranger exhaled. No, but it could be its offspring. Daniel crossed his arms. And it's following the same pattern. The ranger nodded grimly. If it's learned human behavior, if it sees people as prey, it won't stop. Emma's pulse pounded in her ears. So what do we do? The ranger met her gaze, his expression unreadable. We hunted. A heavy silence settled over the room. Emma swallowed hard. Part of her wanted to end this, to make sure no one else had to go through what she had. But another part of her knew. This wasn't over. Not yet. And maybe, just maybe, it never would be. The room fell into a tense silence as the weight of the ranger's words settled over them. Emma clenched her hands into fists, her fingers still trembling from the sheer exhaustion of what she had endured. Hunted. The words echoed in her mind, sending a cold chill down her spine. Could they even kill something like that? Could they stop it before it claimed another victim? Daniel exhaled sharply, rubbing a hand over his face. If we go after it, we need to be smart. That thing isn't just a crocodile. It's a calculated killer. The ranger nodded. We've dealt with road crocs before, but nothing on this level. If it's truly learned human behavior, it knows how to anticipate movements. It knows how to wait. Emma swallowed hard. So how do we stop it? The ranger flipped through the files, pulling out a map of the river system. He jabbed a finger at a bend in the river where the jungle grew thick. Here, this is where it's been sighted the most. We believe it has a den somewhere in this region. It's been hunting humans, but it's also protecting something. Daniel's eyes narrowed. You think it has a nest? The ranger nodded grimly. If it does, it explains why it's been so aggressive. It's not just hunting. It's defending. Emma's heart pounded. A nest. That meant more crocodiles. More creatures just like the one that had nearly killed her. Daniel crossed his arms. So, what's the plan? The ranger leaned forward. We bait it. We draw it out and take it down before it can disappear again. Emma hesitated. Bait it? With what? The ranger's expression was unreadable. Something it can't resist. Emma's stomach twisted. She knew exactly what he meant. Her? No, Daniel said immediately, shaking his head. Absolutely not. The ranger didn't look away from Emma. She's the only one who survived an attack from it. It knows her now. It will come for her. Emma felt like the air had been knocked out of her lungs. You want me to just sit there and wait for it to come after me? The ranger was unflinching. We'll be ready. Daniel slammed his fist on the table. That's not a plan. That's a death wish. Emma took a shaky breath, her mind racing. Every instinct in her body screamed against it, but deep down, she knew the ranger was right. That crocodile wasn't going to stop. If they didn't end it, more people would die. She glanced at Daniel, his face tight with frustration. He wouldn't agree. He wouldn't let her do it. But she had to. I'll do it, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel's head snapped toward her. Emma. She met his gaze, forcing steel into her voice. It's the only way. Daniel cursed under his breath, turning away and raking a hand through his hair. He hated it. But he knew, just like she did, that there was no other choice. The ranger nodded. We leave at first light. Emma exhaled, gripping the edge of the table to keep herself steady. First light. That meant she had a few hours to prepare for what could be the last fight of her life. As the others gathered supplies and set up a plan, Emma stepped outside onto the dock. The river stretched out before her, dark and endless, the water whispering with unseen dangers beneath the surface. She stared at it, at the place where the crocodile had nearly dragged her under. Tomorrow, she would face it again. And this time, only one of them would survive. The night was thick with humidity, the air clinging to Emma's skin as she stood at the edge of the dock, staring out at the dark river. Every ripple, every tiny disturbance in the water sent a shiver down her spine. She knew it was out there, watching, waiting. She could almost feel its presence just beneath the surface, a silent predator lurking in the depths. Daniel stepped up beside her, his expression tense. You don't have to do this. Emma let out a breath, her fingers tightening around the wooden railing. Yes, I do. He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. Emma, that thing isn't just an animal. It's a nightmare. And you're letting them use you as bait? She turned to him, her jaw set. If we don't stop it now, it's going to kill more people. You saw what it did to me. You saw what it's capable of. Daniel shook his head, frustration evident in his every movement. There has to be another way. There isn't, she said softly. This is the only way to draw it out. He let out a quiet curse, then reached for her hand, squeezing it tightly. Then I'm going in with you. Emma's eyes widened. No. Yes, he cut her off. You think I'm going to let you sit out there alone, waiting for that thing to come after you? No chance. She wanted to argue, to tell him he needed to stay back where it was safe. But the look in his eyes told her it was pointless. He wasn't going to leave her to face this alone. Before she could say anything else, the ranger walked up, rifle in hand. We move at dawn, he said. We've got snipers stationed along the riverbank. The second it comes for you, we take the shot. Emma nodded, ignoring the tightness in her chest. And if you miss, the ranger didn't hesitate. Then you run. She swallowed hard, turning her gaze back to the river. Run. She had already done that once, and it had almost killed her. This time, she wasn't sure if she'd make it out. The first light of dawn broke over the jungle, streaking the sky with gold and crimson. The river was eerily still, the water a dark mirror reflecting the tangled branches above. It looked peaceful, almost too peaceful. Emma sat in a small wooden boat, her hands gripping the sides as she let the current carry her forward. She could hear the rustling of leaves along the shore, the faint shifting of the snipers hidden among the foliage. They were ready. They were waiting. She took a steadying breath, forcing her body to stay relaxed. Every nerve in her body screamed at her to run, to turn back before it was too late. But she had come this far. She had survived once. She would survive again. The boat drifted further into the bend of the river, where the ranger had said the crocodile's den might be. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decay. And then the water moved. It was subtle at first, a slow ripple, barely noticeable. But Emma saw it. She felt it. It was here. Her heartbeat thundered in her chest as she forced herself to remain still. The boat rocked gently, the morning sun casting shifting patterns across the water. Another ripple. Then a shadow. A massive shape beneath the surface, gliding toward her like a ghost. Emma's breath caught. She had seen crocodiles before, but this was something else. It was bigger than she remembered. Bigger than it should have been. The water broke, just slightly, revealing a sliver of dark, ridged scales. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the boat. Wait for it. Wait. The creature paused just beneath her, the water shifting ever so slightly. Then, without warning, it surged. A massive explosion of water and teeth erupted beside the boat, the sheer force of the lunge sending Emma sprawling backward. The boat rocked violently as the crocodile's powerful tail slammed against it, nearly flipping it over. Shots rang out. The snipers had fired, but the crocodile wasn't stopping. It was coming for her. The crocodile's massive jaws snapped inches from Emma's leg as she scrambled backward, the wooden boat tipping dangerously with every movement. Water splashed over the sides, drenching her as the beast thrashed, its powerful tail sending waves rippling across the river. She barely had time to react before another gunshot rang out, the bullet striking just behind the reptile's eye. But it wasn't enough. It barely seemed to notice. Emma's breath came in ragged gasps as she grabbed the wooden oar beside her, swinging it with every ounce of strength she had. The impact against the crocodile's snout did little to deter it, but gave her enough time to scramble toward the opposite side of the boat. Another shot fired. This time the bullet hit its thick hide, but still, it didn't go down. Move, Emma. Daniel's voice rang out from the riverbank, panic lacing his words. The boat lurched again as the crocodile rammed into it, its jaws clamping down on the edge of the wood with a sickening crunch. Splinters exploded into the air. It was tearing the boat apart. Emma had no choice. If she stayed, she was dead. With one final deep breath, she leaped. Cold water enveloped her, the current pulling at her limbs as she kicked furiously, her eyes darting in every direction. She couldn't see it. She couldn't tell where it was. Then something brushed against her leg. She barely had time to scream before the crocodile surged beneath her, its massive body pushing her up toward the surface. It was toying with her, playing with its prey. Emma kicked hard, her arms reaching toward the nearest low-hanging branch. Her fingers grasped the rough bark just as the crocodile lunged again, its teeth snapping shut just below her foot. She swung herself up, muscles burning, legs trembling. But she was alive. More gunfire erupted from the riverbank. This time, the bullets hit their mark. The crocodile let out an ear-splitting roar as a shot tore into its side. Blood swirled into the water, staining it red. Emma clung to the tree, heart hammering as the beast let out one final thrash before going still. Silence fell over the river. Daniel was the first to reach her, wading into the water, pulling her into his arms. She was shaking, barely able to breathe, but she was alive. The ranger approached the edge of the river, his gaze locked on the now floating crocodile. "It's over," he muttered. Emma let out a shaky breath, exhaustion weighing down on her. It was over. She had survived. Again.